councillors, and a warm welcome to our youth councillors, Beck and Estella. I think this is your first committee meeting. So welcome, I hope to, and feel free to participate and join in. Call the meeting to order. Just a reminder, this is being live streamed. And could you use your microphones? I don't have any apologies. The only apology I have is from Her Worship the Mayor for lateness. I think everyone else is here, so just move that they will receive the apology for the Mayor's lateness. Those in favour will say aye. Against? Oh, did someone second?
I'll second it.
Yeah, Councillor Barker. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. No change to the order of business. We'll work as per the agenda that's been circulated. Any interest that any member of the committee needs to declare, do that at the appropriate time. We don't have a public forum, so we'll move on to a confirmation of the minutes. So this will be pages 7 through to 13, 15 on your agenda. Had to read through something on page 7, 8, page 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I have someone to move their true and correct record, Mrs. Payne, seconded Councillor Walker. Thank you very much. Those in favour, true and correct record?
Aye.
Thank you. Carried. Move on to the status report. There's just the two items. You able to speak to any update there, Ms. Barton?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, the first status report item is in relation to the Land Development Manual, and that work has been ongoing over the last sort of 12 months or so. It's coming to the very pointy end of it, and there's just some reshaping of the transport chapter. And that will be reported back to the joint committee, the steering group rather, in May, and then come back to council after that.
Okay. Any of the committee have any questions or queries? Someone move that we receive the status report. Councillor Walker, second Councillor Delberg. Move that we receive the status report. Those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Chairperson's report. I don't have any, there's nothing to report that I need to share with the committee. And I'm aware that the Mayor has nothing as well. So I'll move on to the National Policy Statement, Urban Development Capacity Quarterly Monitoring Report. Ms. Gabellini, Mr. Gabellini, Mr. Pawson, welcome. I'll take the report as being read. Are there any alterations or additions or any amendments? Or
morning. I've got a short presentation to give if you're happy for that, too.
Cool. That'll be fine. So.
Alrighty. Morning, everyone. So, as a result of changeover of staff and all of that side of things, this is the combined September and December quarterly reports, just combined into one. Do I have to point to get this thing to...
Check the site. Is it on?
There we go. Helps if you turn it on, thanks. I suppose the first question is, why do we report on the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity? In short, we're required to, and there's three broad areas that we're required to cover off, and that's the property prices and rents, and the number of resource consents and building consents that we have granted in each quarter, and some measure of housing affordability. MBIE themselves collate a lot of this data for us, but we have access. It's data that we supply to them or to Statistics New Zealand as well. And how have we done? Well, the number of building consents continue to rise. We're doing pretty well on that front. House prices continue to rise, but they are showing some sign of flattening off in the last few months. Rents continue to rise at a similar rate as the previous 12 months. Housing continues to get less affordable on a 12-monthly basis, although there has been a slight improvement in the last 3 months period. And demand for social housing has increased by around 30% over the last 6 months. And in the 6 months to December 2017, we granted resource consent for 462 new residential lots, which is a very significant increase over the previous 6 months, which was, we're looking at 253 for the 6 months previous to that. So it's quite a big increase. There's some new draft indicators that have been brought that we're supposed to be reporting on. We have delayed those a little because we are have a bit of backwards and forwards with MB around the accuracy of those, particularly boundaries between different zones. Their methodology seems to be a little rough and is distorting the numbers a little bit. And some of them aren't quite as suitable to a city of our shape. They seem to work really well for, say, a Hamilton or a Christchurch, but not so well for an urban area that's a bit longer and narrower. But we're working with them on that. But the draft indicators are, as you can see there, urban-rural price differentials, industrial land price differentials, housing cost to price ratio, and a land ownership concentration. And that hasn't been released yet. We've seen a very rough draft and then they've quickly pulled it away again, so we can't download it off their website. But I'll cover each one of these off and give a quick explanation of these so that you can know what to expect in the next report. So the rural-urban land price differential is based on the map shown there. It covers the Nelson urban area, which also includes Richmond. And that reflects how Statistics New Zealand report on the data. The theory is that if you have, in a perfect world, where you have enough land zoned for each activity, there would be a smooth transition on the graph between, see the zero on the x-axis down the bottom. Oh, I can point. So the zero here, that line there is the boundary between urban and rural. And so with this being urban and this being rural, with land price up the side. So in an ideal world, an ideal theoretical world, there would be a smooth transition across that boundary in property prices. If there's a big big differential between the two, it indicates there's something constraining the supply of urban land. Now, in our case, we've got quite significant geographical constraints. Steep land up the back of our urban area, which is very difficult to develop. So it's debatable whether it's overly useful, this measure, but nevertheless we're looking to fine-tune it, the areas and the boundary, to make sure it's as accurate as it can be. We're working to try and find out whether that's the case. And I think that it really does, one of the key things to understand with these indicators is they're not black and white, they're not good or bad. They are very much just trying to give us a general gist of where there might be some challenges or might be constraints. And MB, when they rolled these out to us, were very clear that we mustn't take them as gospel. We need to be a bit careful about looking at each one of them in isolation and not considering the wider context.
Any other questions? Or you want to take questions?
Happy to.
Councillor Eklund and then Councillor Barker.
So just through you, Mr. Chair, just to get my head around this. So that's, in my mind, that's showing that the price of our productive land is not as, like, it's not as productive or not as valuable in terms of the market demand as urban land, and it looks graphically like a tidal wave of pressure on that land to extend the urban boundaries in a way. Is that something you could read from that? Is it essentially urban land there'll be huge pressure on rural to be converting it into residential rather than rural land?
Through the chair, that could be the case, yes, and that's why I suppose that's the reason that MB have developed the measure in the first place, to try and get a handle on that. If we rezoned a whole lot of rural land, would we see that change in a more smooth transition? See a more smooth transition between those, either side of the divide. I'm not sure it's quite as simple in Nelson as that, because of the geographical constraints and where our urban land sits in relation to the rural.
Just subsequent, but it also must be because of although the price of rural land per square metre or whatever might be less, you're actually having to buy bigger parcels when you're buying rural land, so it doesn't necessarily show the true effect of market influence on buying property, whether it's residential or rural. Although, do you know what I mean? Although residential is more expensive per metre, it's actually less expensive. But it's actually less expensive in terms of the amount that one purchaser is buying at a time.
Yes, that's correct. But I suppose when they're developing these measures, they have in mind developers of larger lots rather than necessarily. It puts everyone in the mix.
And just one final question is, what's the purple and the green? Sorry. Is it just highlighting the closest to the centre?
Yes, all it does is how far away they are, the distance from that line. And one of the things to just keep in mind, when how I mentioned earlier that it doesn't seem to work quite as well for a narrower, elongated city urban area. I confess the first time I looked at this, I thought, well, how does that make sense? Surely the land in the middle of our CBD is the most valuable. But of course, the geographical centre of that area isn't our CBD. It's probably somewhere like Te Hunanui, Stoke sort of area, Annesbrook sort of area. So our CBD is probably the peak that happens in the blue, for example. So we're looking at putting some contour lines around on this map so you can get an idea of where the centre is and how they interact.
Firstly, the colours on the graph don't match the colours on the map. Is there a reason for that? Why can't they be, or am I a bit colourblind or something?
Because we're only measuring, well they sort of do for the first two pieces. We're just they're showing two different things really. The map is really purely to illustrate the boundary between those two colours, so you can clearly see that boundary. When we come to the graph, there's four different areas we're talking about there, so it'll be very difficult to.
Right, and the second question, I think the graph simplifies something which is a bit more complex than what I'm seeing there, and the complexity is that in the city, we all know that there are premium areas where the land value is significantly greater than, we can all point to the areas where the land value is very low. And we're going to have that accentuated when the valuation GV comes out this year. So that's an overall look at it, but the reality is that it's quite different, much more complex.
Through the chair, so I think we just need to remember that MB have given us a set of tools, so we've reported on the first 3 and now we've got additional 4 to add to it. None of them are perfect in terms of trying to reveal what the issue is with housing affordability or zoning, or whether or not it's a council issue and we have the ability to affect it, or whether or not it's in the market. So we just need to bear in mind that with all of these indicators in the reports, we're providing information that always has to have the specific Nelson context around it, and that we have to delve down and figure out exactly what does it mean for us.
Appreciate that. Just comment that it is an example of how over-planning can cause problems.
I think it's quite helpful, but I understand that there's limitations, particularly around our geography, shade, views, those sorts of things. But I've got a question. If we intensified urban living, would the blue dots get high? Would you expect to see a even steeper graph? Because if there's an intensification, then you'd expect that the land value would actually go up, or would it go down?
Again, it's related to that whole demand and supply curve. You know, if we're still not, I suppose development intensification in the CBD is unlikely to happen unless there's really high demand for it, in which case we may not see any change at all, or it even might go up, because the value of those residential properties in, you know, say apartments or, you know, in the CBD may actually be really quite expensive.
Yeah.
So it does illustrate the challenges in, you know, trying to measure a lot of this stuff meaningfully.
I mean, I guess I'm just sort of trying to picture, if you wanted to get a smoother flow and we release more rural land, it would probably be more in Tasman, but you might then end up, without your intensification of your urban areas, you just might end up with a greater urban sprawl, which is not necessarily what we as a region want to achieve. So I'm not entirely convinced that a more gentle curve is the ideal goal either, even with our limitations.
So through you, Mr Chair, maybe I can just answer that. I think the key here is that Chris and Lisa need to interrogate this information.
Yes.
So that we can understand how it actually relates to Nelson, and what we may then be able to take from it and what we may be able to do.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I guess I'm just sort of
have that in there.
projecting into the future. If you did, you know, there's lots of ways you could achieve a more gentle curve, but that's not necessarily the best urban planning for the future. Yeah, so how you achieve that, there's lots of different ways of achieving that.
I've got 2 quick questions. Define parcel.
As far as I know, it's related to titles. So one.
Yeah, I that's what I thought you meant, because I'm picking up something that Councillor Ackland mentioned before, is that in a rural area, you'll probably have a larger parcel of land, get subdivided, where there was a hectare, there's 8, down to 8 parcels.
Yes.
So that's rough, so it's gone 1 parcel on rural.
As far as, well, it's based on the, excuse me, it's also based on the rating database as well. That's how they've valued the land. So it goes down to that level. The other challenge with that, of course, is that in some cases the boundary here goes, you know, through a title or through a parcel, and there's some challenges around how we deal with that.
That was going to be the next question. Does that boundary move?
There's some debate around that with MB at the moment, but I'd anticipate that it would move as we rezone land, yes. because that's how we would see change in the graph.
Right, okay, thank you. Councillor Delberg?
Thank you, Mr Chair. My question would be around the value of the parcel. How do the ability to put multi-storey buildings on it, i.e. apartment blocks, etc., show up here?
Through the chair, it's based on the rateable units. So if you had it's based on the land value, not what you could put on potentially put on it, not the development potential of it. Alrighty. The next one is the industrial land price differential, and this helpfully compares industrial zoned land to each of the other zones, so commercial, residential and rural. The map shows a couple of examples. The top one is Area 1 and the bottom area is Area 3. And you'll see a lot on the right-hand side of the graph, the 1 and the 3. So that's actually two separate graphs covering each of the two areas. I've just chosen those as two examples. It's very much a draft, this one. And you can see there, it's a similar concept to the previous one we just looked at. If there's some sort of smooth transition between the two, then it indicates that we have enough of each of the land zones. And you can see, you know, here is the classic that MB were talking about, wanting some sort of curve through here. And here it's even less pronounced, where it's pretty much, you know, there's very little difference. There's not that sharp differential over the zero line. So, sorry, let me just explain that a little better. This is the industrial commercial boundary here. This one is the industrial residential boundary, and this is the industrial rural. And you can see that, so essentially you're looking at 6 different graphs all in the one place. Sorry if that is slightly confusing. I have to remember that I've had a fair while to absorb some of this. And so Area 1, for example, doesn't have any boundary between industrial and rural. Any questions on that before I? Okay. And then the final one that I can show you today is the housing cost to price ratio. So this is really just a measure to find out how much the land price is contributing to the cost of delivering sections. So it's the ratio between the price of the final product versus the cost to deliver it. No, just the land. Yeah. So in theory, MB have indicated that a ratio of 1.5 is sort of the cut-off point, if you like. Above 1.5, the land price, which is the price of the serviced section, or sections of the land serviced by council, is over a third of the cost of the final delivered section, which is, you know, at the point they're saying that's getting a bit expensive and a bit difficult for property developers to take on those sorts of projects. And they're saying at that point that's indicating that there might be some planning constraints, some, I don't know, the processes and the compliance costs might be starting to make the land more expensive. So that's our planning side of things. But the reality is there's also the, you know, whether developers can finance projects, there's all sorts of other things that contribute to that as well. And you can see we've done between 2004 and about 2013, 2014, it's been reduced, it was reducing quite significantly. You're saying that that's...
So, well, I think there was a number, this also signals whether or not, in terms of the levers that council controls, whether or not we need to rezone any more land. And so between 2004, in 2005 we did some substantial rezones up Ngāwhatu and Marsden Valleys, so that increased the supply, which affects the costs. What this graph could be indicating, if you took it by itself now, is that potentially we might need to think about rezoning some more land, that there's not sufficient supply.
So is that saying that if the final cost of a sale of a house is say 800,000, then the land value should have been around 266,000? That's the 1.5?
Yes.
So, okay, no, that's quite helpful. So we can measure that based on our land value sales versus the final
Yes.
cost of selling the house plus the land. Yeah, 1.5 seems like a good target, doesn't it?
And you can see that we're sitting at around 1.6 at the moment, with Tasman being at that 1.5 level.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to risk exposing my mathematical ignorance, or just general ignorance. But is the cost always 1? And we're just, and that graph's just showing the ratio to that cost, so it's 1.6 times
Yes.
whatever 1 is. Okay,
Yes.
okay, that's good.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, just looking at graph, so I'm taking on round about the average price of say 600,000. So we're actually saying there the land's worth about 66k.
No, a third of the price.
No, but you look at 2/3, you're at the top there. 1/3's the house price, the land is 1/3,
1/3 of the house price.
cost price ratio. So that would assume that the house is worth 2/3. So on 600, the house is 4. Leaves you 200 to take that figure up there. So if you're saying
So if you-
600,000,
So if you had a $600,000 final delivery price, the final price was 600,000, then $200,000 of that would be the land.
and then you take that up there, am I saying that, so of the 200, if you're taking that as 1.5, then one of that would be 120,000, is, you're trying to tell me, is that consent cost and construction cost buffer and agent fees? So that would be about 130,000. Seems kind of weird.
No, I think that the one is always the cost of the build side of things, and then the price being what the sales price is. So say at 1.5, we're talking, 600,000 is a good one to use. We're talking $200,000 of that's the section price. Once we start going above that, then at 600,000, a much higher proportion of that becomes the land price.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the question I was trying to find then, you've got consented construction cost, and you've got construction cost buffer and an agent fee, and you've got land up the top. So how do you, if we say it's 200,000 for a section, then what is that percentage up you're telling me would be consent cost, agent fees, effectively?
$400,000.
Now, of the 200,000 section cost,
Of that,
what part of that is?
It's not breaking that down in particular. No, the measure doesn't do that. Yeah.
So how common is this sort of formula, 1/3 land, 2/3 building and the associated costs? Is that accepted in industry practice?
Well, yeah, we're not entirely sure. That this is what MB have brought to us, and I think it's something we should probably highlight. MB are setting these indicators themselves, and we are bound by the MPS to report on them essentially as they are, with a little bit of room to wriggle as far as negotiating boundaries and stuff like that. So, I'm not sure as far as industry best practice or accepted practice. We can certainly have a look at that.
Yeah, because, I get it, you buy a section, double the price, and that's the cost of your building, or if you've got, it probably comes on the market a third of it is land, because, just use two examples near where I live, there's two sections have gone for sale, one for $365,000, so that means you've got a house that's got to be, the property is going to be $1.1 million, the one next door is $425,000, that's a $1.275 million property. So, I'm reading it right.
Well, that, through the chair, that could indicate that there's a lack of supply, and the section price in that scenario is more than a third of the costs. It's probably in Richmond where there is a lack of supply.
Yeah. Councillor Falconer?
I guess I was just going, I guess if, it'd be quite interesting to see what the impact of, say, tiny houses or eco-houses might have on this, because in fact, if you're building a tiny house or an eco-house on quite an expensive piece of land, you would end up with a ratio more like 2 or potentially even higher. So someone might buy, like Councillor McGurk said, you might buy a slightly bigger piece of land, or in Nelson, I think our land prices are very much reflected by sun, location, and then you might put a house, you might only build for 100,000 or 200,000 when the land's cost 400. So that would increase our ratios up higher. So I guess we need to take into account the kinds of houses people are also choosing to buy, and that sometimes people would rather have their dream piece of land and put a smaller house on, and that will change the ratio as well. But that could be a positive thing in terms of urban development, in terms of eco-housing, small housing, that kind of thing.
Through the chair, I think we'd need to see that happen to a lot more than we currently are to actually influence the result of this. This covers off all of the development that's happening. So
certainly, I just did the maths on mine, and mine's a ratio of 2.
So we could in time potentially see a change there, and if that was something that it's something we'd just have to monitor, and then it would be some discussion around whether it's a good thing or not.
I guess I'm just raising that sometimes the ratio might be higher because of the kinds of houses people are choosing to build into the future, not because of the lack of availability of land.
Well, that's done.
Oh, that's
if you have any other questions.
Any wrap-up questions? Councillor Ackland?
One was on special housing areas and the effect that's coming through with, are we seeing that changing? Any of the measures on supply? I just noticed that there's like a chokehold. Essentially what we're saying there is that although we put through 400 new lots, it doesn't look like we're producing or lessening the demand, especially with those tidal wave graphs and so on. Do we predict that that's going to be happening? Do we know through building consents are being applied for and received, not just consents for special housing areas?
So through the chair, the 462 consented new lots, so that's not new titles, that's new lots that have been consented. In the last 2 quarters, none of those were showers. So that was a massive spike. It was Marsden and Awhatu Valleys predominantly where those lots were. So we have been looking to see the effect of showers and just the effects of market demand and development coming online generally.
We're probably likely to see that in the next quarterly report or even after.
Yeah.
Whether there is I don't know whether we've even got enough showers to make a huge difference. Some of them are really big, I suppose, but anyway. And just sorry, Mr. Chair, and through you, is just I might have missed it, and sorry if I did, but the building consents, I couldn't quite remember whether when you showed us whether they were breakdowns of new build consents or just building consents for renovation and so on.
It only includes new builds.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Chair. Yeah, a couple of questions. Way back you made a comment, social housing increased demand 30%. So what's the numbers? 30% sounds like a big number to me. What's the actual numbers of people waiting on a register?
Yeah, bear with me for a second. Right, here we go.
So Chris is looking at page 37 on your agenda.
So we have, as at June 2017, there was 55 applicants waiting on the register in Nelson. Sorry, I'm just looking at the 120%, 178% that I've put here. I just need to have a look and see how they relate. So in Nelson, 26 of the 55 applicants are priority A. So that's the most at risk that basically need housing now. A lot of the time they're young families, for example.
Through Mr Chair, so I'm reading that same thing. So 78 applications, so we've got 55. There's 23 waiting, in that case is 30%. So 30% sound a big number, but I'm just guessing that 23 people are waiting is the increase, which just brings it to me just a bit more into reality. The other second part of the question, then another question for you, Mr Chair, would be, you made another comment there on page 22. Cannot comfortably afford is the term you're using. You've used it for typical rent and first home.
I'm looking at the wrong one.
If I'm reading that and I'm trying to think then, does that mean lots of people or what does comfortably afford? And what's their budget? I mean, I read that, I just don't get a lot of information out of it. That's just feedback.
Sorry, what page was that? 22?
It's on two parts.
Oh, right, that's
Yeah.
based on the housing
On
affordability.
5.6.
Yeah.
5.6 in your summary and 5.7.
So that's based on that housing affordability measure that MB publish.
So Mr Chair, so do we have a definition of what could not comfortably afford? Just know myself, when I was first starting out, getting our first home, it was quite tricky. And that just became a priority. If that's what your priority means, comfortably, cannot comfortably afford, I kind of think that's normal, but I just want to know if this is something exceptional that I should take notice of.
So, through the chair, that the HAM measure measures the medium house price to the medium income. And once it gets over a ratio of 5, then that is determined to be unaffordable.
Definition, that's right. So that's the median house price, medium income for Nelson. Knowing that Nelson's got quite a low medium house price and we've got quite a, income, but we've got quite a high, get it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. On the same topic, on page 32, under the 12-month rolling dwelling rents, your comment underneath, rents have been increasing over time, but at a slower rate than house prices. So the prices have been going up more than the rents. So your conclusion, this may suggest there is a shortfall in housing affecting the rental market. That doesn't sort of add up to me. You know, I sort of thought with the opposite.
There's got to be a reason for it.
And when I look at when I look at the graph on page 30, and I see largely from about 2010 on, the growth is largely exceeding the consents. What do you think in a projection that's going to go with the SHAs?
So, through the chair, we've excelled in the last 6 months. So, I mean, it's a project. I guess we could hopefully project that peak is going to continue, and that
That growth is going to exceed supply.
that supply is going to start to catch up with growth. And then in turn, we would likely see that would also flow through and affect rent and house prices. I mean, that's the theory. That's the blunt theory of the way it works.
Because at the moment, in 2018, both lines are on the upward trend, aren't they?
Yep, that's right. We've been behind, but we are starting to catch up.
Right. And the other question, Mr. Chair, what effect is all the red tape and extra conditions and requirements on landlords? The hearsay and the word around the community is that the numbers of rental properties are dropping because people are getting out of them. They're not going to do it. There's too much hassle. There's too many problems with the conditions and the things they've got to do, and they're turning them into Airbnbs and all that sort of thing because, hey, it's just not worth it anymore. Are we looking at that sort of factor in the HAM?
So through the chair, another separate parallel work program that's going on with that the National Policy Statement requires us to do is to work with developers on feasibility analysis. So we are at the moment going through all of our development areas with the developers, looking at all the costs and using that feasibility analysis to figure out whether it is in fact true that red tape consenting DCs are significant players in that housing affordability puzzle.
So have you got data for what is actually happening with the number of rental properties? Is it dropping?
For rent properties.
Rented properties in Nelson. Rented residential, what's the trend? Is it increasing with all what we're doing, or is the hearsay correct that people are getting out of it?
We don't have any data for that, but at the same time, we'd expect a much more pronounced. We'd expect the graph on page 32, for example, we'd expect that to begin to, or maybe, yes, on 32, we'd expect that to start to ramp up a bit more significantly than it is at the moment, rather than the relatively constant increase that we're seeing at the moment.
So is it possible that you will be able to actually get the real hard data on the number of residential rental properties and determine, is there a trend that people are getting out of them or not? Can we achieve that? Can we find that out?
Yeah, I'll have to have a look and see whether that's available or not. Yeah, I'm not sure where we would get that from, but I can certainly inquire.
Yeah, but I only ask Jim because it's a very relevant thing in all of this. If that is an effect that people are making these decisions to change the way that they're going to handle their investment, then it will have a profound effect on what we're doing.
Just a couple of questions, picking up a comment on Barker does. Are we able to take into account the impact of holiday rentals on the rental accommodation? Is that something that could be factored into a Nelson context?
Yeah, we assume 5% rate in there, in the data. Potentially, that's something we can look at in a bit more detail to see whether that's changing over time as well.
Yeah, it might be helpful. And the other one I see on page, picking up something that Councillor Dalberg mentioned before on the front page, I think it's page 27 of the report, page 3 of your report, 27 of the agenda. You talk about the social housing needs quadrupled since 2015. I'm just wondering about some data. If we're going to deal about our vulnerable populations, we need to look further than just MSD data and perhaps our own community housing. Is that something that could be considered?
Yes, absolutely, we could include that next time as well. It's
Because-
certainly a question that or something that we've considered when we're writing this one.
Because, if we're talking about housing, accommodating our more vulnerable populations, the elderly, the whatever, if that's trending upwards, we know that there's an unaddressed need. If it's trending down, something's working.
Yeah, the challenge, I think, is going to come when we have two different organisations, ourselves or the people we contracted to manage ours. We have MSD and
So there's a myriad out there.
the privacy side of things, of matching those two data sets, because there may be people on, or there's likely to be people that are on both lists, and making sure that we're not double counting could be a bit challenging, but it's certainly something we'll explore.
Okay, thank you. Right, probably enough questions. We probably need someone to move and second the recommendation, so we'll have something to at least talk about. Moved Councillor Fulton, someone to second. Councillor Walker. Any discussion or debate? There being none, I'll put it. Those in favour of the recommendations, receive the report and placing it on the website and also to MB. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Next item on the agenda is the primary contact targets for draft freshwater quality. Primary contact targets. Well, Ms Fisher, are you presenting a report? Is it Mr Hill?
Through you, Mr Chair, sorry, we're just handing out the a handout that's referred to in the report at section 3.5. So this has only recently been received in the last few days. It provides basically an overview of what regional councils around the country need to do in order to achieve swimmability targets. So I'm not expecting people to have read it or reading it. It's summarised in the report. We just didn't have the final version of this at the time the report was drafted. Just provide a quick overview. So all regional councils have been required to confirm draft swimmability targets for the largest streams by the 31st of March 2018. Basically the report's indicating that Nelson has the best water quality nationally. We've been achieving 100% swimmability. And we have programs underway and currently and in the LTP to continue to achieve this target. Things like Nelson Nature, the inflow and infiltration program that we've got in place and the LTP coming up, Wakapuaka bursting into life, they're outlined in section 4.3 of the report. And just to highlight that, we plan to engage with stakeholders as part of the Nelson Plan process before we finalise these targets at the end of 2018 in December. So all regional councils around the country are having to set draft targets by the 31st of March and finalise those targets by December 2018. So we're seeking that the committee notes the targets and that will be reporting further on those targets before the end of the year, after we've undertaken engagement with stakeholders as part of the Nelson Plan process. It's just a
Through you,
overview.
Mr Chair, I can also, if it would be helpful, just give you a very brief summary of some of those other regional council results, given that you haven't had the time to read the report. So as Mr Heels noted, Nelson has 100% swimmability for rivers. By way of comparison, Northland has 24%, Auckland has 23%, the Waikato has 37%, the Bay of Plenty has 95%, Gisborne 77%, Hawke's Bay 63%, Taranaki 39%, Manawatu Wanganui 43%, Wellington 65%, and Tasman 97.5%. So that gives you a comparison across the country. Canterbury is 86%, West Coast 99%, Otago 79%, sorry I forgot the South Island, Southland 62%.
Your question, staff, really, probably on that 100% target, and again, it's probably, I like the word realistic and achievable, and exceedances over 540 CFUs per 100 mils. Is that we're still comfortable on that? I mean, if we're doing 100%, someone out there is going to say, well, why don't we drop it to 300? We're going to get a couple of those. So are we comfortable with that target?
Through you, Mr Chair, yeah, that's correct. That 540 target is in the National Environmental Standard. That's what we need to achieve. We're currently achieving it. We've got the programs in place to continue to achieve that.
Yes, I have a question around what fourth order means, and what about our smaller waterways and how are they looking? And also 4.2 Whangamoa comes up as good. What's that relative to excellent? And I'm kind of surprised that the Maitai, has the Maitai got excellent the whole stretch? Where do you measure the points in terms of getting excellent?
Thank you. Through the chair, so just to answer your first question in terms of fourth order streams, so in terms of how it works out is, but basically the first order is at the top of the catchment, and then as you build up through the catchment with streams, as they join together in orders, they basically come to a fourth order, and that's essentially in Nelson as we're identified with fourth order actual sites that we're actually monitoring. In terms of the actual first order and second order streams, I think as you really sort of pointing out, in terms of most of our actual pressures are on the smaller streams, and they actually feed into the larger streams in terms of things like sediment and E. coli. So in terms of where we're actually trying to make the improvements is in the smaller streams. What was it? And then in terms of the actual grades, so for the Whangamoas,
I think in the report that's just been handed out on page 11, it identifies the different classifications, page 11. So in order to achieve what you need to, what levels you need to achieve to be an A, B, C, D and E. And those colours effectively, so A is excellent, A is excellent, green is good, and yellow is fair.
Sorry, through the chair, so for the Whangamoa, and there are actually four different measures that we use to come up with these grades. And for the Whangamoa, it's basically the percentage of exceedances over 540 and the 95th percentile where it's actually good. But for the other two measures, it's excellent. And those two measures, in terms of 540 and the 95th percentile, are essential when we have actual stormwater events, and that's when we get the peaks in E. coli. So that's really what's affecting those results. That's
Yes.
correct, yes. So in that instance, the natural fair is because the 95th percentile again is the fair reading there, and in terms of the actual impacts there, it's obviously rural and it's mainly actually diffuse sources, things like sheep and horses, and again it's through stormwater. So in terms of how we're trying to improve those kind of impacts really.
So through you, Mr Chair, just to remind the committee that the Nelson Nature Bursting with Life programme is focused on the Waka Puaka for that very reason that we want to bring it back up.
Through the chair, that was my subsequent question, to make sure there's adequate funding into the future to address some of these needs, and it sounds like, yeah.
We're only measuring E. coli in those fourth order rivers, so that's all this measure is, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. Do we conclude the Maitai Reservoir for the cyanobacteria?
Through the chair, it's largely because it's not a recreational bathing site, as I understand.
That's correct, yes.
So this is more focused around recreational contact with our waterways? Okay. Thanks.
Just on that topic, I know in the past we've looked at the possibility of that reservoir being recreational. It has been looked at in the past because in overseas, particularly in UK, water reservoirs are very commonly used as recreational places. But so it was considered, but it's water reserve and the shorelines and the accessibility and the ability to use it recreationally be very low. So we shouldn't look at changing it, I don't think.
So through you, Mr Chair, I think that given the national environmental standards for drinking water, that may not be a good route to go down.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm happy to support the recommendation, and perhaps just to put some context around the 100% for E. coli. The chairman has rightly pointed out that the NPS around swimmability is around an E. coli measure. Clearly there's more to water quality than E. coli, and I think one of the things that we need to make sure we convey to the public of Nelson is that the long-term plan with a increased funding and significant focus on the environment isn't wasted work. It's important for people to understand that 100%, this measure around 100% doesn't mean there's nothing to do. There's plenty to do and plenty that we are doing and wanting to work towards. So I'm comfortable with the response here from the staff. I think it is a good reflection on the Nelson community's commitment to high environmental standards and this council's much greater focus on its regional council functions over the last 4 to 5 years. That focus is only increasing as we go through the next 10 years, and we look at issues around nitrates, we look at issues around water quantity and how we manage water flows. We look at a range of matters that I think are going to lead to a depth and breadth of environmental outcomes that will be complementary and add to the NPS. The challenges that we face around this type of legislation, however, is that it has to go through a plan change process. They are slow. Local Government New Zealand has consistently engaged with central government around changing some of the processes that allow us to implement these changes for improved environmental outcomes in a more efficient and effective way, in a more timely way. as we go through the plan change process, we need to be conscious that making decisions around complex issues around water quality require informed decision makers, and that is going to be challenging for us too, because commissioners with extensive experience in water management are hard to find, and we need to have them sitting on our panel so we make good decisions for our community. We need to make sure that we have investment in science and not just at a local government level but at a central government level, and that is, in my view, sorely been lacking and needs to be increased. There needs to be consistency around modelling work so that when we see these reports that are reflect the whole country, we have confidence in the models that are used. So this is a first step, and I would emphasise that that is all it is. It's a positive step and it reflects on a good starting point for Nelson City Council, but it is a starting point, and that's what we've built into our long-term plan. So I want the public to understand that the spend that we're talking about in the next 10 years is not wasted money. It is a good investment that will deliver even better outcomes for the future.
Just a point, I'll also totally in support of this, but I just, and I note paragraph 3.6 in the report, and the recommendation is that there's a big part of this is community stakeholders, so it's important that to recognise that the community will have the opportunity to focus on what they want to see, when they want to see it, and how it's done. So that's work that's underway. No other debate. I'll ready to put the motion. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the national changes to the Nelson Resource Management Plan to give effect to the NES for plantation forestry. Mr. Hill, and is it Ms. Jones?
Yeah, through the chair, I'd just like to introduce Jackie Jones. I think it's your first committee meeting. You've been with us how long now?
5 months.
5 months, and you're our planning advisor. Yep.
Welcome.
Cool. So just a quick overview. We're required to update our operative resource management plan. So we're working on developing the Nelson plan. This is our Nelson Resource Management Plan that's currently operative, to reflect the new NES standards by the 1st of May 2018 without going through a public notification process. So we're just updating our current plan to reflect what's in the National Environmental Standards for Plantation Forestry. This report provides an overview of those changes and seeks that the proposed changes are received, that any further changes are considered as part of the Nelson Plan process as we move forward. So we do have the ability to be more stringent than what the NES provides for in the areas of biodiversity and freshwater. But this would require a plan change, and so rather than doing a plan change, we need to consider this as part of the wider Nelson Plan review, which is currently underway. So that's just a quick overview. Happy to answer any questions.
Seems to be a perfectly logical way of going about the proposed changes. We're obligated to implement the NES, so. Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Through you, just referring to item 4.5, the second bullet point there, are you giving extra consideration then beyond what you were relating to recent events, particularly over in the effects of Tasman on the forestry activity? Are you now in a position where you're even ramping up more the concerns about erosion from forestry activity?
So through the chair, the NES itself requires greater consideration than what we currently give in the plan at the moment in terms of erosion. So it is being ramped up as part of this process.
So, subsequent question to Councillor Walker's question, can we expect to see some changes in forestry practice into the future as a result of this?
Through the chair, yes and no, because in consultation with the larger forestry companies, they're basically saying, well, we've got our own standards that we operate to, and some of those are above the bottom line, if you like. But I guess what this does is lifts the whole bottom line for everybody.
I'm happy to move the recommendation. Happy to move it.
Councillor Faulkner, move. Second. Councillor Barker. Any discussion?
I'll speak to it briefly. I think that this is a important piece of legislation, which it's timely to have it incorporated into our existing plan, and obviously when we go through the review of the next stage, we can lift the bar a little bit if we feel it's important to, particularly around water management. But I think it's, as the staff has said, we've already got quite high standard in the industry already, but it's important that we ensure that bar is maintained across the board. So I think this is an important piece of work to incorporate, and it seems quite straightforward. It's nice that it can happen so easily.